Good evening. This is the Black Man who reads aloud, and I'm coming to you from Tampa, Florida, continuing my journey through the Federal Writers Project, the South Carolina slave narratives, those interviews that took place uh, during the years of 1936, 1937, and 1938 from the Workers' Progress Administration when researchers went down south to interview our ancestors who had been held in slavery. Today, we are reading a general reminiscence of the red shirts from Spartansburg, South Carolina, February 7th, 1938. The red shirts had a big parade and barbecue in Spartansburg, South Carolina. They met at the courthouse. There were about 500 red shirts besides others who made up the big crowd. I remember four leaders who came from Union County. One of the companies was led by Squire Gillian Jeter and one by Squire Bill Lyles. The company from the city was led by Captain James Douglas, and Buck Kelly from Pea Ridge was there with his company. Everyone drilled in Spartanburg that day. The speakers of the day were the day from Union were Squire Jeter and Captain Douglas. While they were speaking, old Squire George Tucker from Lower Fish Dam came with his company. Mr. Harrison Sorter, rather of Will Sorter, was one of the captains. We saw General Wade Hampton and old man Bill Tillman there. Of course, Wade Hampton became a governor, and of course, Bill Tillman was a U.S. senator, and both were segregationists, bigots of the highest order. About this time, I was bound out to Mr. Jim Gregory, a blacksmith. The wealthy landlords brought Negroes. Mr. Jim Gregory was the blacksmith for old Johnny Metter and Aunt Polly, his wife. He told me that Uncle Johnny brought a man Heath for $3,500. He also brought Heath's wife Merrill for Aunt Polly, but I don't know what he paid. The Meter house was just this side of Simstown. Aunt Polly's father, Triplet Meter, built this mansion. The brick were made in a home kiln, which was near the house. Aunt Polly was a little girl when the house was built. While the built brick for the sitting room fireplace was still wet, he made little Polly step on each one of them to make the impression of her feet. So those footprints in that fireplace are Aunt Polly's when she was 5 years old. She grew up there and married and lived there until her death. Miss Ida Knight's house, formerly the Sims house, was built no later than the 1840s, or no later than 1840. Dr. Thompson lived there first. Dr. Billy Sims married Dr. Thompson's sister, Miss Patsy, and that is how the house got into the Sims family. The old post office was known as Simstown, and I believe it was up near the Nat Gist Mansion. Simstown was the name for the river community for years because the Sims settled there, and they were equally or more prominent than the Thompsons and Gists in that community. All the Sims were country doctors. To this community at the close of the Confederate War came old man Argo Tate, his wife, and Ben Shell as refugees fleeing from the Yankees. When they came into the community, Nate Gist gave them a nice house to live in on his plantation. Mr. Gregory got all the sheet on used on the Meador and Gist plantations, and also on the Sims and Thompson plantations. Plows were made in his blacksmith shop from 10-inch sheet on. The sheet was heated and beaten into shape with his hammer. After cooling, the tools could be sharpened. Horse and mule shoes were made from slender on rods brought for that purpose. They were called slats, and this grade of on was known as slat on. The shoe was molded while hot and beaten into the correct shape to fit the animal's foot. These old shoes fit better than the store-bought ones of more recent days. The horseshoe nails were made there too. In fact, every farm implement of on was made from flat or sheet on. I spun my first pair of pants I wore. Ma sewed them for me and wove and finished them with her hands. She made the thread that was sewed with by hand on the loom. I made cloth for all my shirts. I wore homemade cotton underwear in the summer and winter, for we were poor. Of course, my winter clothes were heavier. We raised some sheep, and in the winter, woolens were made from the wool sheared from the sheep every May. Wool was taken to the factory at Bevansville and there made into yarn. Often, cotton was swapped for yarn to warp at home. Then Ma ran it off on spools for her loom. Sledge hammers were made from the cane gotten off the creek banks and bottoms. Aunt Polly Meta had no patrollers on her place. She would not allow one there, for she did her own patrolling with her own whip and two bulldogs. She never had an overseer on her place, neither. Neither did she let Uncle Jimmy do the whipping. Those two dogs held them, and she did her own whipping. One night she went to the quarter and found old Bill P-Legs there after one of her Negro women. He crawled under the bed when he heard Aunt Polly coming. Those dogs pulled old P-Legs out, and she gave him a whipping that he never forgot. She whipped that woman, too. Morg was Merrill's nickname. Morg used to sit on the meat block and cut the meat for Aunt Polly to give out. Morg would eat her 3 pounds of raw meat right there. Uncle Johnny asked her what she would do all week without any meat. She said that she would take the skin and grease her mouth every morning. Then she'd go on to the field or house and do her work and wait until the next Saturday for more. I don't know how old I am, but I well remember when the Wheelers men came to the plantation, they tore up everything. We heard that they was coming, so we dug holes and buried the meat and everything we could. We hid them so well that we could never find some of them ourselves. Wheeler and 36 men stopped at Dick Jeter's place. I think that was in 1864. The Jeter place touched Miss Polly's plantation. The Jeter place was right near Neal Shoals on Broad River. Mr. Jeter had the biggest gin house in the entire township. Old Mr. Dick was at home because he was too old to go to war. Pa was still in the war. Then, of course, Ma and I and one of the other children, a few darkies, was at our home. We saw Willie and his men when they stopped at the gin house. They began to ransack immediately. Wheeler gave some orders to his men and galloped off to his outhouse. The Negroes ran, but Ma and I stayed in the house. Wheeler rolled up in front of the door and spoke to my mother. He said he had to feed his men and horses and asked her if there was where the corn was. She told him that the gin house and the crib which contained the corn did not belong to her, so she could not give him the keys. At that, he ordered his men to remove the log from the crib. By this means, they broke into the crib and got all the corn. They then ransacked the house and took everything there was to eat. They tore out the big cogwheel in the gin and camped in it for the night. Next morning, they set fire to the gin and then galloped away. Soon, Mr. Jeter's big gin had gone up in flames. They took all the corn and all the fodder. 200 bundles that we had in the barn away with them. John Boyd, County Home Union. The interviewer, Cardwell Sims, Union, South Carolina, January 26, 1938. The black man who reads aloud. Have a great day, and thank you.